Hi, this is Kevin Dunn, the Get Fit Guy. This week, it's a little bit of a different episode. It's my first ever interview episode. I'm very excited to share this with the listeners, and I really hope that you can get something from it, just as I did. Our guest is a super inspiring person and really has a very interesting and useful story. I'm hoping that I'll be able to do more of this type of content, but it also depends on what the listeners would like. So if you enjoy the interview, please send me an email and let me know what your thoughts are, and I would love to have more guests on the show. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy. Hi, and welcome to a special episode of Get Fit Guy. Special in the sense that for the first time ever, I felt compelled to speak with another human. So I'm joined today by my guest, who is Caragh McMurtry, who is an autistic former Great Britain Olympic rower, and she's the founder and director of Neurodiverse Sport, which is a not-for-profit organization with a mission to raise awareness of neurodiversity in sport, and whose mission is for neuro-inclusive practice to become the norm in all sports. Hi, Caragh.
Hi, thank you for having me, and I feel absolutely privileged that you have been compelled to interview me.
Well, you know, the compulsion was strong because, as you know, but the listeners won't know, I actually read an article about yourself on BBC News. And that article really resonated with me because I have a lot of very similar, if not identical, experiences to you. And I thought that it might be really useful to other people because I think there may be so many people listening to the show that may have similar experiences. We'd be so grateful to hear from someone like yourself. So we've said that you were an Olympic rower, but I'd just like to find out, what was it that made you interested in doing rowing? And did you have any prior sporting background to that? What brought you to it?
Yeah, I guess as a kid, I wouldn't have seen myself as one of the sporty children, but I was super active. I was always running around. I couldn't wait for break times. I couldn't wait for PE. When I was at home, I couldn't wait to go up the park, which was luckily only a few doors down from my house. And, on a weekend, I'd spend 12 hours up there, forget to drink, go home, glug a load of squash and then go back out again. So I guess at my heart, exercise has always given something to me. I've been compelled to do it. And I guess I didn't see myself as a sporty kid because I didn't have that kind of, aura, or I didn't hang out with those people. I just had lots of different friend groups and I wouldn't say kept myself to myself, but yeah, I was just kind of doing my own thing really. And I was really into every kind of after school club that I could do, all different sports. I think I've done football, gymnastics, dance, trampolining, netball, literally anything that I could get my hands on, I'd try out. So I went to a state school, and I guess for me, sport was very much my own pursuit, which I think was quite important, actually. I wasn't really pushed to do it by anyone. My family's not very sporty. And I think that kind of actually really feeds into my journey through sport on the whole. But I was introduced to rowing through an outreach project, which it was called Project Awesome, and it was aimed at getting more state school kids into the sport. And they partnered with our school and took some rowing machines down for an after school club. I was like, great, another sport to try. And I did like it straight away, but it took me a while to kind of get serious about it because I was still kind of experimenting with what you should do as a teenager or what you actually shouldn't do. But then once I realized that's not what I'm about. I'm not actually about going out and drinking, and I'm not about socializing with people when there's not a purpose. And sport gives me that kind of shared purpose to socialize with people. And it makes me feel good. Whereas I don't know, going out and drinking and socializing didn't make me feel good. And I guess quite early on, I made that kind of decision to take sport a bit more seriously, rowing in particular. And then it all kind of kicked off from there. Like I was, I guess, fortunate in that there were some sort of talent ID schemes in terms of trying to bring on sort of like kids from more diverse backgrounds at that time. So, you know, I was kind of pulled into racing at the interregional championships and then trialing as a junior athlete. And I just ended up kind of doing well and then getting to the next level and the next level. And in 2009, I was selected to race at the Junior World Championships and I won a silver medal. And I guess that's kind of where my journey with rowing on a more professional level started.
Okay, so it sounds like you have a bit of a mixture of intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, because you said that you were personally drawn to doing sport yourself, but then you also mentioned that there was like a social aspect that brought you into it too.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like the social aspect massively drew me in, but it was more like, you know, we all have social needs to a degree, but it, for me, I was just, as a sort of teenager, I was just like, socializing without structure and without a purpose was like, didn't attract me at all. And it was quite confusing. And I felt like I was massively just playing a role or masking. And so that's where like sport was a great alternative, because I was like, oh, I'm still being social. I'm not, you know, ostracizing myself and isolating myself, but it feels like we're actually in this for a reason and we're working towards something. And with rowing, it's kind of nice that you are very much like in control of your own part of the kind of sport, but then obviously you're still part of a wider team.
Okay, so it's interesting. You used an interesting word there, which I think we should talk more about later, which was masking. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we see with people with neurodiversity in order to look more neurotypical. But maybe these are terms that we need to get into and kind of like define for people that might not be familiar with it. So, of course, we've mentioned already that you have an autism diagnosis.
Yeah.
You know, your organization is Neurodiverse Sport. So we'll come to talk to that in a minute. But there was a journey towards becoming, you know, having a diagnosis of autism, which actually I never talk about to people. So this will be the first time I talk about it. And it's funny that I choose to do it to tens of thousands of people. But it is that idea of having a misdiagnosis,
yeah,
which then takes you down another path that you have to unravel later. So if you didn't mind, maybe we could talk about that what happened there. What brought that misdiagnosis about? Was there something in your behavior, or was it other people that referred you to that? What happened really?
Yeah, I guess I'll be really honest. And like, I'd always struggled at times in my life with kind of a bit of depression or a bit of anxiety. And I think in retrospect, I can put that down to not feeling like I really understood my own brain. Like the messages you receive at school, the messages you receive in the media, the messages you receive from family and friends, if they don't speak to you, like that can be really, like I talked about earlier, but it can be really isolating and it can make you feel different and it can make you feel wrong, even if you don't know why. So I think a little bit sort of the earlier issues with anxiety and depression were kind of to do with that, because obviously I was undiagnosed at the time. And I think sport for me was like really key to maintaining my mental health as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. And I absolutely thrived when I was able to use it in my own way and to really express myself and to go about things in the way that worked for me best. And I think that's where I mentioned earlier about like my journey, especially early on, was very independent. I actually think that was a good thing, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was so in control. And, you know, the club I was at wasn't like a high performance club. I was kind of the only one that was really doing what I was doing. And it meant that I could do my extra sessions and then I could dip in and do the sessions with everyone else. And yeah, I just had a lot of autonomy and I didn't feel as different because there was no one to compare myself to and no one to say, oh, the way that you do that, that's weird, or the way that you think about that, that's weird. And I was just completely just living my best life in sport. And that got me from kind of state school, junior world championships, under 23 world championships. And then when it came to sort of joining a centralized system, and then it's kind of very obvious, like the ways that you're different and the ways that you stand out, kind of, for me, I kind of like all the other parts of my life in which I kind of like maybe wasn't thriving or, you know, was standing out for the wrong reasons. I think I drew away from and put everything into sport, which is where I really felt like I was able to just be myself. And then suddenly that safe space in which I was able to be myself and thrive, suddenly that was being judged. And that one place that I could decompress and just live as me and exist as me, that was kind of taken away. And I think that had a massive impact on my mental health and my ability to decompress on a daily basis. So I ended up kind of like, we talked about the word masking, denying all the things that come naturally to me and trying to act kind of neurotypical. So if you want some solid examples, it would be the first time that I walked into the National Training Centre, one of the kind of men, the heavyweight men, came down the stairs into my face and was like, smile. And I'd get stuff like that quite a lot. And I'd get like, you need to be more sociable. You ask too many questions. You're too honest. You need to learn to sugarcoat things. And they seem like really, really small things, but when you're getting it all the time, and if you think about your rest, like my baseline is just to be like, have a really like lack of affect, like really like passive face. And if you're spending 8 hours somewhere where you have to change that and you have to like go out of your way, like I'm quite introverted, to socialize with people and to laugh and be gregarious, like it's absolutely exhausting on top of training and competing. And really, like that's what led to periods of just burning out and then regrouping, because I'm a determined person and, you know, I had a goal. I'm very focused, and I don't know if you're familiar with the term monotropic focus, but it's kind of like a really positive spin on autistic tunnel vision. So I kind of live life in monotropic focus, and like, so I kept coming back. And I think that really is what made it look like I had some kind of mood disorder, which was diagnosed at the time as bipolar disorder, which is obviously a very serious psychiatric condition. And I was put on 1,400 milligrams of lithium, 150 milligrams of lamotrigine, and 25 milligrams of quetiapine over a 5-year period. So that's 2 mood stabilizers and an antipsychotic. And the impact that had on me was really insidious, because you don't take it straight away. You don't take all of them straight away. You end up building into them. You don't take it straight away and feel completely different.
Yeah, having had that, you know, I think probably because my body weight, I got 50 milligrams of that. And I remember the first time I took it, nobody saw me for a week.
No.
Because I didn't leave my bed. And I can't imagine what it would be like trying to do sport at an elite level whilst on that drug. It's the opposite of performance enhancing.
It is the opposite of performance. Someone asked me, did you need TUE for that? I was like, absolutely not. No, I didn't need a TUE. It's not performance enhancing at all. I think, you know what I think the most traumatic part was? It was the fact that this was all kind of going on behind the scenes, because there's not like a lot of joined up thinking, and, you know, the coaches won't necessarily know. They'll know I have a label. So they'll know I have a label of bipolar, and, you know, in the office, they might talk about it like, oh, she's on a mad one again. That's genuinely the kind of language that was used. But they won't really understand the kind of therapy that's going on behind the scenes and how that's impacting me. And the way that they'll see it is, this athlete is still failing. This athlete is, you know, she's lost it. She's not as good as she used to be. And, you know, in everyone else's eyes, I felt a massive amount of shame, because I have a lot of pride in my performance. And when I'm at my best, I guess I don't cut corners and I don't just kind of coast along, and I wouldn't be there if I wasn't serious about it. And I knew that kind of mindset was not being reflected in how I looked and in my performance. And that was really, really hard to stomach. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but the fact that I was giving 100% absolutely every single day. And I knew my performance wasn't showing that. And then the way that people were judging me was reflecting a poor performance. So it's almost like I would, if I was someone else, I would look at me as an athlete and think like, what's she doing? Has she just lost it? Like, is she just not trying? I don't know, all these things.
Frustrating for you, because as far as maybe you're concerned is that you're looking for a solution to the problem, but solution is just driving you into the ground like a tent peg.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really good to talk to someone. I mean, we said this in our messages. I was like, I'm really sorry that kind of like happened to you as well, and you went through something similar. But it was almost like relieving to like talk to someone who got it and like understood what it was like to be searching for a solution, to trust in the kind of medical practitioners, to be on these types of medications, and to have it impact your brain and body like it does. And it's really quite an isolating experience because you don't really meet many people that have kind of gone through that. And, if they have, they don't really talk about it. So hopefully that's something that this podcast can do, is like kind of bring that sense of like validation to other people. But yeah, it was, I think, I'm like, why did it take me 5 years to get to the point where I was like, okay, this medication should be helping and it's not. But it took me that because I am just a problem solver, and I will always blame myself first. So I was always like, this is my problem, I need to solve it. This is my problem, I need to solve it. I'll try this, I'll try this, I'll try this, I'll try this. And it got to the 5-year point and I was like, I don't know if this is my problem. Like,
also, you go to the doctor, right? And you say, this isn't working. And what they do is they say, well, it takes time for it to build up in your system.
And they put more, they give you more. And it's like, that's why, it starts off as lithium and then it's like, oh, I don't think this is working. Add lamotrigine. I don't think this is working. Add quetiapine.
Yeah. And those give you side effects, and they give you drugs to counteract the side effect of the drug.
Yeah.
It's hard. And what I found about this, the bipolar thing too, was that I wasn't that compelled to believe this. However, when I did read about these things, I thought, well, I am doing that and I am doing that. And it's almost like when you read your horoscope, because it's kind of like you can find something in there that applies to you and then say, okay, yeah, that is the thing. And I don't know if you found that too. And I think that might be why you stick with it for so long. You say, well, I do get depressed and I do get really exhausted and I do get frustrated and angry and snappy at people. And I think that's the difference between an autistic burnout and a depression, right?
Yeah.
Is that they've got overlapping symptoms, but they're completely different things.
Yeah, it's about the root cause. It's like, is the root cause bipolar? Is the root cause that your brain goes through these highs and lows? And if that is the case, then the medication will work. But if actually the root cause is something different, then the medication's not going to work. You're just putting a plaster on it, or you're not even putting a plaster on it, to be honest, but you're dealing with like secondary symptoms rather than the root cause. So of course it's not going to have the positive impact that it needs to.
I guess there's almost like that social reinforcement too, where you've got, like you said, the people in the office or whatever that were going, oh, she's just on one of her things again. So that almost like reinforces within the social group that, yes, there is something wrong. And that, again, makes you inclined to stick with things because you've got this objective, supposedly, input coming in that something's wrong with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It just confirms. It's just one thing after another. It's confirming what the doctor said, isn't it? It's like you always felt different. You always felt like there was, potentially like there was something wrong with you because you didn't see yourself reflected in other people. And then someone says, oh, this is what it is. And you're like, oh, I guess it must be. Like, because even 10 years ago, people's understanding of autism was nowhere near what it's like now. So there was no better, like even if bipolar didn't really completely make sense, I remember trying to fit myself into the box. I was like, I'm not rapid cycling and I don't get really, really manic. So maybe I'm this one here that's like, you get hypermanic and you just, so I was like trying to fit it in, but there was no better reason. You're probably similar, but I'm someone who like, I need to understand and I need there to be reasons and I need to understand the why behind everything. So it was really important for me to get to that.
Yeah, I'm exactly like that. I like to dig down into things. And, like right now I study philosophy at university. And the reason for that is, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer?
Yeah.
Because I'll take it all the way down to the very bottom if I can. So, yeah, I think that's something. But so that's the misdiagnosis. So what was the process that led to that being, okay, that's not what the deal is here, and this could be autism?
Yeah, so I guess I hit like a real low in winter of 2018. It was the indoor rowing championships, and I think it was like one of the first times it had been held at like the Lee Valley Velodrome. And they were really trying to like, I guess, bring it into the 21st century and really like hype it up and make it like a real spectacle for the audience. And I considering all of this medication I was on, I felt like I was still on for kind of a good score. And I absolutely bombed. But on reflection, there was loads of smoke, like loads of lights, like really, really loud music. We had to pose at the camera as we came onto the sort of like stage. And I think all of these things really are like incredibly exclusionary for like somebody who is autistic. So I was like way, way too hyped and saturated by the time I got, onto the ergo. And I just was, you must know what it's like when you're completely overstimulated. You go almost like ping to the top and then all the way to the bottom again. And I did a really, really disappointing score. And I remember just thinking, I think this is the end of the road. I don't understand. Like I sort of was putting two and two together with the overstimulation, but it's never clear when you're kind of in the woods. And then basically there's a new performance director that had joined the team at that time. And he had kind of been introduced to the athletes, behind the scenes, like, this is so-and-so, blah, 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 this is so-and-so, this is where they fit in. And I know that, there was a couple of us that were in the black book, and he'd been kind of introduced to me as probably a waste of space and a loser. And I think essentially at that time, the UK Sport mental health panel had just been put in place, and the coaches, this new performance director, had a conversation, and the coaches kind of said, like, we need to get rid of this athlete on mental health grounds. And I know this to be the case because I've heard it from a number of different people who were involved. And when this performance director like introduced himself to the team, I actually believed him when he said he was very person-centered. So I think they were kind of probably asking the wrong person to do that. And I think he was kind of listened to them, but was like, okay, right, I understand what you're saying, but also need to do the right thing by this athlete. And I was also very lucky that this mental health panel was made up of some genuinely decent people and not just yes men. So they were also going to do what was right for me as well, rather than what was right necessarily for the sport. But what was right for me actually happened to be what was right for the sport. And they saw me and fairly quickly were like, you're not bipolar. What on earth are you doing on all this medication? Like, how are you getting out of bed in the morning? And they basically diagnosed me as autistic. Weirdly, I think Asperger's is not a term that was used even at that time, but that is what is written on my medical notes. So I think practitioners still use it. But the kind of intervention was to have therapy for the kind of turmoil that I'd been through, to really get to like know what autism meant and what it meant to me, and maybe like what I could ask for, what the most important things I could ask for from the coaches. And then over a period of like 8 to 10 months, I titrated off the medication, and the coaches had asked the kind of practitioners, like, what kind of improvement will we expect? Because I think they expected me to kind of get binned, and I didn't. So they were like, oh, okay, she's going to be old. What kind of improvement are we going to expect? And they said, quite considerable. And I was told like a year later by one of the coaches, like, we did not expect you to improve as much as you did, because like a year and a half later, my 2K had improved by 17 seconds from that kind of time when I absolutely bombed.
When you're talking about an athlete, that's a significant difference. I mean, you might see something like that in a novice,
yeah,
but not in a high level athlete. So that's amazing.
Like I went I PB'd for the first time in so long, and I kind of went from like the bottom of the team to the top of the team in terms of like physiology. But it's just frustrating because these things are so simple, but as soon as there was like a shake up after Tokyo, it was almost like all of those things that I'd worked for, all that understanding, that tiny bit of like flexibility was gone, and I knew I was in for burnout again. And it's kind of what prompted me to retire and to create Neurodiverse Sport, because I was like, understanding needs to be systemic and neuro-inclusive practice needs to be systemic if neurodivergent athletes are going to be able to participate and or perform at their best, at any level in sport, whether it's grassroots or elite. And I'm just so driven because I have experienced the utter lows of being completely misunderstood and, I would say, to some degrees mistreated, whether it's intentional or not. And then the absolute joy of being able to, I can imagine that's what other athletes feel like. They, other athletes kind of get to do what's best for their brain and their body. And I felt that for a little bit and I got the results, and that was amazing. And I want other athletes who are, who don't fit the mold to be able to do that as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because, so for example, I made a podcast episode maybe a couple of months ago, which was about the gym being a really unusual place for neurodiverse people. And I've noted that when you sent your bio over, you'd written in it that you're passionate about inspiring and supporting all neurodivergent people to live healthy and active lives. And I think that's important because that's what everyone can do, even if you're not a sports person, is be healthy. And I found that the gym, for example, is an absolute nightmare because when I go there, first of all, it's buzzing neon lights.
Yep.
There's usually like some kind of bright color scheme, like lime green, like Kermit the Frog. It's horrible. Lots and lots of people there, usually high beat per minute music, like dance music or something, people thudding on the treadmill, weights crashing and bashing, and just a lot of strangers and activity. What I don't like is if I'm squatting, people walking behind me, don't like it, right? So there's all these things. And I feel like I've been in the sports industry my entire life. So I've learned to try to repress that stuff so that I can get to the gym. And then that's exhausting. I then go home and go for a nap. I can't wait. I have to go to sleep afterwards. But there must be such a barrier to entry to people when they come. And there's also still this social stigma about it. I mean, I saw a comment on one of the social media things after I'd made this episode where someone had said, well, can't that person just go to another gym? And it's like, well, no, this is absolutely not how this works.
Also, this is every gym.
Yeah, there's no gym that's got no people and is silent, right? But, it made me think about having traveled. I did loads of seminars in different gyms. I've been in hundreds and hundreds of gyms. I've never seen a gym that's got, hey, we've got a quiet hour or anything like that. And I just think that there must be things that we can put in place that would enable sports people, but also enable people that just want to be healthy and active.
Yeah.
And what can we talk to, in terms of that? What kind of things did you see that changed that were positive for you when you had those changes that helped you?
I guess I kind of still had to put up with, I literally couldn't feel kind of more to your experience of going to the gym, because I actually love lifting weights, or I did love lifting weights. I was good at it. It was one of the things that I was really good at. And so no matter how overwhelming the kind of gym experience was, I would just find ways to be able to do it. And that included, going to sleep afterwards to just process all of the sensory information. But it's even things like, red tape get in the way. I mean, this isn't necessarily the case at public gyms, but, when we were lifting, it's like, no, you can't wear your headphones, you can't wear your noise cancelling headphones. You need to be able to hear the coach and things like that, which immediately prevents someone from, doing what they need to do to be able to access the activity. I think there is so much that can be done. I think what you said about quiet times, I think what I'm trying to sort of think in my head at the moment is people will definitely say, right, we can't do this because of health and safety, but there must be ways around those things. So because I was just thinking like lower lighting, and then someone will probably say, well, you can't have lower lighting because of health and safety. We're living in the 21st century. We can find ways around this. Like,
it can't be the case that, you've got equal rights kind of acts, and then you've got health and safety things, and those are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can't just favor one thing over another. You can't say, well, yeah, absolutely, we're going to give autistic people the right to access, but it's going to be under these conditions, because that's the opposite. It's a contradictory statement.
Yeah. And also, and just because, you're not like falling over there and then doesn't mean it's having a massive impact on your health. Because I know that like a lot of sporting establishments were kind of built in a time where fluorescent lighting was the rage. And I kind of ran a workshop last year in a room that didn't have any like natural lighting and a certain frequency that really messed with my brain. And I couldn't run the workshop to the best of my ability. I sort of like started to almost lose my ability to like think properly and to form like sentences properly. But afterwards, it felt like I had whiplash. My brain was like hurting. My whole head was hurting from like the kind of photosensitivity. So it's like, are we considering that side of health and safety? When we think about it, we're probably thinking like, oh, we don't want anyone to trip up and, break their leg. But what about the genuinely physical pain that you're causing people who, with, I guess, invisible disabilities or differences? I actually don't like to call it a disability, but...
No, I consider it, because I've got that hyper focus on things, I consider it to be like a hyper ability, because I feel that a given task, if I was passionate about it, I'd probably mostly always outperform a neurotypical person.
Yeah. Because I was thinking, like, this is actually something that, and I think it is like such a complex topic, and it will be really different for different people. So there will be some autistic people who will always feel disabled by their conditions. But I think sometimes we jump to the disability label too quickly, not having explored what we can do to change environments and attitudes to enable people. And I really, really wonder, whether a good 70% of autistic people who feel disabled, who consider themselves disabled, would change their minds if they were allowed to exist in environments that were good for their neurology.
Yeah, and it's also difficult, because you almost have to pull the disabled label out in order to get a response.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be considered disabled, but then you have to do that in order to get your needs met. And that's a kind of very circular problem, very catch-22, isn't it? And what I've found is people will say, well, we cannot possibly make a reasonable adjustment for every single neurodiverse person. And that's challenging too. So I'll tell you a little thing. Is I went to a lecture the other day, and the person in front of me had a fidget toy, but it was a clicker. And so all I got was click, 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 clickety, click, 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 click. And I began to get extremely stressed, but we've reached this odd scenario now where one neurodiverse person is meeting what their needs are in order to focus, but they're triggering another neurodiverse person, meaning that they cannot focus on the lecture. And now, to me, that's where this all is almost like an unsolvable puzzle. And how do we work this out? Because everybody, like you've said, everyone's got different needs and everyone's on this spectrum. So what can we do to make sure that we meet the needs of the many, but also respect the needs of the one?
But I guess in that situation, I would think, well, surely there's a way to compromise. So if you're going to cause them genuine distress and you're going to impede their ability to engage, then, with whatever kind of strategy that you're using to help yourself, then is there a way that you can compromise? But that being said, well, I'm not saying compromise if somebody says, well, I don't want you to do that because it's just not the way it's done and I don't like it, or it's like, I consider it rude. Does that make sense? Like, because obviously traditionally, the way that an autistic person might go about their day and their business and socializing, it impacts, I think, mainly people's sensibilities. And that's where my attitude is like, get over yourself. And it's just finding that line of like, what is genuinely having a negative impact, and that balance between there's going to be a middle line between like, you know, you getting what you need and the other person getting what they need. And traditionally it's been like 0% for the autistic person, 100% for the kind of neurotypical. And I think we can find like a kind of 50-50 split, and that goes for neurodivergent kind of versus neurodivergent as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good point, isn't it? It's just trying to find that kind of like Confucianism is the middle way, right? How we can help everybody get something. And I mean, for me, gyms, you know, you could make them a little bit quieter, but you're still going to have the buzzing lights, and you're still going to have all the people and the noise of the weights. But you may allow someone more space within their cup of coping if you remove one trigger, right? So I think that that's what's important too. So when you're looking at talking to, you know, coaches and maybe people that are running sports organizations and associations, what are the kind of things that you do say are, you know, reasonable adjustments that could be considered, or ways that they could open the door to allow autistic people? So, like, for example, this is the first time I've talked about this, and it seems quite easy because although I know there are many, many people going to listen to this, I feel like I'm only speaking with you. So therefore it's easier, but I have like a shame about it still, which maybe sounds unusual to other people, but I don't like it, so I never talk about it. So like, what could we say that could empower people that may feel that they have neurodiversity issues, or that know for sure they have neurodiverse challenges, and how we can bring the two sides together?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of like the advice that I would give to coaches and teams, a lot of it hinges around attitudes and accepting difference, and then a little bit around understanding difference and understanding different ways of thinking, and like looking beyond kind of perceived behavior. So the way that you would interpret a certain behavior, or what a behavior means if you were to perform it, would be very different to somebody else, and especially somebody who is neurodivergent if you are neurotypical. So, for example, let's just talk about that old school coach who wants everyone to stand in a row and, like, you know, look them in the eyes, because that shows respect. And for them, if someone's not looking them in the eyes, it's disrespectful. Well, it's getting them to understand that for some people, that's not what it means. For some people, it makes them really uncomfortable to look someone in the eyes. For others, the best way that they concentrate is kind of when they're looking into their mind, which is usually up to the, you know, to the left or the right. So I think, yeah, a lot of it hinges around understanding difference and being okay with difference, and trying to work with individuals rather than labels, and finding each person's individual baseline and working, you know, up from there, rather than the norm here and you're trying to bring people to the norm and then bring their performance up. No, just like let them sit where they are and bring it up from there.
Can I ask you a question? Have you ever heard of a character from mythology called Procustes?
I have not, no. Which I should be ashamed of, because I studied archaeology and classics at university.
So I believe that Procustes was one of the children of Poseidon. And Procustes waited on the road to Athens, and he kidnapped travelers. And what he did was he had a metal frame, and he forced people into the metal frame. And if their bodies were too small to fit into the metal frame, he stretched them out and forced them to fit. And if the bodies were too large for the metal frame, he cut and hacked pieces off to make them fit. And when I was reading about Procustes, it made me think about what you're saying, is that a lot of coaches are trying to force you to fit into this rigid framework that they have. And by doing so, they're bending you completely out of shape.
Yeah.
And once you're bent out of shape, you're never going to excel within that environment.
Yeah. I love that analogy. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
Procrustean coaching, I was calling that, yeah.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, a really great analogy. And it's exactly what I'm trying to say, I guess, is, yeah, you're kind of, when you have such a rigid kind of idea of what the norm is, and then, you know, what medal winning behaviors are, you're hamstringing people straight away, because you're expecting them to expend all of their energy kind of moving to that, and like you said, cutting pieces off or stretching them before they can even elevate themselves. But I think that also applies to kind of the grassroots level of sport as well. It's what we're talking about with gyms, and we're expecting that norm in that kind of situation is your ability to, or not even your ability to cope with, but what is attractive in a gymnasium space. And then, you know, if people are, we talked about how we almost spend all of our energy getting there, and then let alone actually doing the activity. And, you know, for some people, you know, the majority of people, exercise is a chore and it's hard. And so if you're making it hard to even get through the door, you know, people have really busy days, like maybe they've got children, they've got work, they've got loads of life admin, they've got travel. And then you're saying, okay, and now we want you to exercise and we want you to do it in this environment that is completely inaccessible and overwhelming. Of course, you know, there's loads of autistic people who are inactive because what you're asking of them is just unreasonable.
You know, I'd be really interested to see if there's any figures that correlate between things like diabetes and maybe like high BMI and autism, and to see, you know, how much that relates to exactly what you're saying there, is that there's just this huge barrier to entry. Like you said, like even traveling there, I have to go do things that are close by to me. So I'd be interested to see what the correlation is between those things.
No, I agree. I think currently the data shows that there's like much like lower participation levels within the autistic population, and also health outcomes are a lot lower as well.
Yeah, and things like, you know, like we've mentioned about training, and of course this is a fitness podcast, but I mean, I understand things like employment are as well, like rates of dropout from university.
Yeah.
And I think those things are what all combine in this kind of like maelstrom to mean that there's a lower life expectancy, which is because people don't have any reason to get up each day. They don't have any reward in their lives. They don't feel any sense of achievement. And when they do to have a sense of achievement, you know, there's still that kind of thing where you're saying people might be talking negatively at you and things like that within a different environment. I find university's not too bad though, because I think a lot of people are there with like specialist ideas. But I think in the real world, it can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But we should probably try and wrap it up. You know, thanks very much for coming and speaking to me. I really appreciate not only you sharing everything with everybody else, but you taking the time to talk with me. And I think that was really nice. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you. And if anybody wants to, you know, get in touch, if any listeners have any similarities, then, you know, obviously feel free to email me as usual. And I'm going to put Caragh's, you know, social media links for Neurodiverse Sport will be in the show notes, and then the links. So everybody feel free to get in touch and have a free and open discussion about your own experiences. So thank you, Caragh.
No, thank you so much. And it has been like a really interesting discussion. It's been really, really easy as well. I think I don't actually always find it easy to talk to people. So obviously we're on a similar wavelength. So thank you.